Hello, Divine Creations. Thanks so much for dropping by. This has been really on my heart the last couple days. I've talked many times the yogic reasons why Neo-Advaita is dangerous. The yogic reasons why skipping right to self-inquiry without proper preparation is dangerous. But there is also a psychological reason. There's a cliche, and it's really true in my experience, and it also really speaks to the preparatory practices, and that is to transcend the ego, first you have to have one. So anyone who has severe egoic imbalances, such as codependence, severe trauma, Neo-Advaita will just destroy you. And it's really simple to understand why, and I speak from personal experience. Anyone with those kind of conditions, and there are other psychological conditions, but those are the ones I'm familiar with, so I'll speak about those. In essence, doesn't have a solid sense of self on a relative level. Forget capital S self. A healthy, balanced sense of an individual. In essence, doesn't have a healthy, functioning, what's called in traditional Advaita, a healthy, functioning jiva. In simple words, a healthy, functioning personality. There's deep wounds. And so going straight to the absolute leaves one with no real guidance system for how to operate. Here's a great example. If you're very codependent and you just go to the thought like everything is God or I am the self, it leaves you literally unable to take care of yourself and unable to navigate this world. In essence, unable to give healthy yeses and nos to the constant demands and constant requests that people and life make of you. So traditional Advaita Vedanta offers software. So you can think of PTSD and codependence and other such psychological conditions as faulty software. But traditional Advaita offers, before it takes you to self-inquiry, it offers healthy software, such as karma yoga, which the essence of karma yoga is figuring out what your duty is in society, and figuring out maybe is not the right word, but coming to understand what your duty is and doing it, to letting go of attachment to results and to not seeking things in the world, to not to let go of the idea that happiness is going to come from any object. Now, most people that I've met in satsang, they can parrot that like, oh yeah, happiness comes from the self. But if you look at how they live their lives, and I was one of them, it's like seeking happiness in the world left and right. And of course, there's all these teachers who say, oh, happiness can only be found from the self, and they're like embezzling their students and sleeping with their students and so forth and so on. So, but that's the foundation of Advaita Vedanta is having that orientation towards life that, hey, none of this stuff can actually give me happiness. And that's not an overnight matter. You don't just go to a satsang and be like, oh, none of this stuff can give me happiness, so I'm going to realize the self. Maybe for a really ripe soul it is, but for most people, that's quite a letting go, right? Because all of us have been taught that happiness lies in sex, money, relationship, friendship, activities, adventures, goals, everything, the world, people, places, and things. People, places, things, and experiences. So just that one simple piece is a radical shift. And it's not a shift that can be forced. God knows I tried to force it. That didn't go so well. So without such basic things, see, self-inquiry takes you to the place of choicelessness and detachment and just spaciousness and just acceptance and being with what is and accepting what is and rolling with what is. But without that good software for how to make decisions, here's a great example of how I really fucked myself over with Advaita Vedanta. I was renting out my house to someone who was a dear friend, and which in and of it, I was off traveling, and she and I just started to push each other's buttons. Like we were cut out to be friends, but we weren't cut out to be landlord tenant. And we just kept rubbing against each other. And then it got to the point where, like, how in a relationship, a romantic relationship, like the person drives you crazy, right? And so we were just driving each other crazy, and we're in a very enmeshed relationship, landlord tenant. It's a pretty intense relationship. And so whenever I would get upset, I would do an Advaita Vedanta process. Sorry, not an Advaita, what I would call the Neo-Advaita process, the work of Byron Katie, which is a great self-help tool. But again, just like most Neo-Advaita, it skips all the preparatory. And so I'd get really upset and I'd do the work for days and I'd come to peace. I'd be like, oh, this is a blessing. This should be happening. I should keep this person as my tenant. And so I did. And then I would get upset. And then I would go back to the work. And the work would take me back to peace each time, but it didn't resolve the underlying emotional, because self-inquiry isn't designed for that. Self-inquiry is designed, as Ramana Maharshi said, for the mind that already has one-pointedness of mind, for the mind that has lost interest in worldly things, for the mind that is filled with sattva, which is dispassion, unattachment, peace, contentment. Self-inquiry isn't the tool for emotional upheavals. So I went through wave after wave after wave of emotional upheaval. And granted, this isn't self-inquiry, but it's you can think of it as a long form. The work of Byron Katie is a long form of self-inquiry. And I would come back to peace. I'd be like, oh, this is supposed to be happening. And then I would do the work, and I'd come back to peace, and then explosion. Oh, and I do the work. Oh, this is supposed to be. And this went on and on for like 6 months when I should have just ended it. The initial thing was for 6 months, and I should have just ended it at 6 months. But I was just doing I was using Neo-Advaita nonsense to cope. And that's the thing, is Neo-Advaita doesn't really give you a way to navigate life, because Neo-Advaita is only focused on the absolute. It doesn't focus on the relative at all. If you try to bring the relative in a Neo-Advaita satsang, like if you bring up PTSD, or you bring up the gunas, the 3 qualities of mind, or you bring in, an unhealthy relationship, in general, the response you'll get is, well, who is it who's upset? Who is it who has the PTSD trigger? Just observe the PTSD trigger. Who is it who wants to leave the relationship? So forth and so on. I mean, occasionally you'll get some good advice, some good guidance. I recently went to a traditional Hindu satsang with a teacher who's in a lineage, who's actually a monk, an actual renunciate, and none of that. He wanted to get to know me. He's like, okay, tell me about you. What do you do? What's important to you? And when I shared about some of the challenges I'm facing, he offered some Vedic wisdom that was appropriate to someone, appropriate to my situation. That's the thing. Neo-Advaita is cookie cutter, one size fit all spirituality. And it's disastrous. And here I speak from experience. I'm recovering from severe, it's called complex PTSD. And I think a lot of people with PTSD or complex PTSD are drawn to non-duality because it promises escape from really intense life situation. And it doesn't provide it. It does not provide it at all. I have two close friends who non-duality, they have complex PTSD like me, and it's practically destroyed them. Yeah, it's really, yeah. So let's see if there's anything else I want to say. And hi to my 5 live viewers. Thanks for dropping by. I started this channel just because there was one particular Neo-Advaita teacher who, there were severe allegations towards, and what it's really become for me is a real realization that most modern spirituality is bullshit, not just Neo-Advaita. And most of it has a price tag. Most of it's a business. And almost all of it is not pure at all. And that's okay. The world's an impure place. But the thing is well, I've compared the process of non-duality to surgery, right? A doctor has certain ethical, has taken certain vows. And if those vows are broken, they're getting big trouble. And most modern spirituality, there's no vows. There's no real lineage. And anyone who claims a lineage with Papaji, that's non-existent. Papaji was never given permission to teach by anyone. Same thing with Ramana. Ramana never gave anyone permission to teach. And most of these people are not sannyasis. They're not monks or renunciates. That's really important. It's actually really important. I may speak more on that later. I mean, I've met many satsang teachers, and most of them are people who just give a talk and then they just go live life. And there's nothing wrong with just going and live life, but what do I want to say? That's a whole nother topic. I'm gonna come back to that one later. This is so without a functional personality, Advaita Vedanta will destroy you. It took me to the brink of suicide so many times. I can't even tell you. I'd be like, no, this is unhealthy for me. I'd put it aside. I'd start pursuing other things, but I missed the bliss. Why did I miss the bliss? Because I hadn't pacified Rajas. Rajas is desire. If you approach self-inquiry with a mind full of Rajas, you're basically pursuing spiritual hedonism. You're like, I want to get high, because that's what it is. But it's a temporary high, and every high has a rebound, has a low. And then I would just kind of collapse. I would do self-inquiry very vigorously, sometimes for hours a day. Then I would collapse. I'd feel awful. Sometimes I'd feel suicidal. I'd be like, okay, I need to put that aside. But yet I would forget. How could I forget? How do you forget that something drives you to the point of suicide? That's tamas. Tamas is ignorance, inertia, density. It's not quite illusion, but it's not illusion. Tamas conceals. And so I'd forget. So if you approach self-inquiry without having purified tamas gunas, you're going to get your ass kicked. Thanks, Muhammad. Self-inquiry is not designed to overcome severe tamas guna. That's just not how it works. best advice I ever got for overcoming tamas guna was from a Hindu priest. He's like, go sign up at your local yoga class and do a lot of yoga. It's a great way to break up tamas. Self-inquiry is not. Self-inquiry will actually increase it because you just sit around and tamas is inertia. So here we've looked at it from a psychological perspective. We've looked at it from a yogic perspective. We looked at it from a traditional Advaita perspective. I'm very grateful to be in recovery from Neo-Advaita. I consider it one of the ego's greatest delusions, and I consider myself lucky to have made it out. Some people do kill themselves. Some people go crazy. It's an addiction. There's no question about it. It's an absolute addiction. Thank you for joining in. Thanks for saying hi, Muhammad. And let's just sit for a moment. So how to cultivate, I threw out the spiritual cliche, you've got to have an ego before you transcend it. How to cultivate that? Well, one traditional Advaita teacher told me, well, for karma yoga, and I would argue that this applies for bhakti yoga as well, you actually just take on the I thou. You start a relationship with God, even though we've all heard the satsang thing and we all know that, there is no separation, but you take that attitude on of like, okay, God, I'm your servant. How can I serve you? That's the karma yoga. Like, you're the boss, God. The results are up to you. I'm doing this to serve you, not to get anything. So that attitude starts with healthy ego development, which of course is what's lacking in most cases, and with things like codependence or PTSD, is somewhere along the line, the ego development process, the healthy ego development, the functioning process got disrupted. Neo-Advaita offers a magic wand. Just inquire, and everything will be hunky-dory. That can happen for some people. They can inquire once, they can go to a satsang, they can go to a holy place or meet a teacher, and they're done. In my experience, that's very rare. I don't offer a magic wand because that's not how it worked for me. For me, it's been a process of recovery, again, from this addiction and this deep, deep delusion. I wish everyone a beautiful, beautiful day. And for those who are also in recovery from this, it's like, what do you want to do? Like, what makes you feel good? That's healthy, bunch of Cheetos and TV, that's fine every now and then, but like nature, walk, dancing. I've taken up dancing. One of the best things I've ever done. One of the best things I've ever done. And yeah, just some things to consider. Take care. Much love.